All right, hi everybody. So, for the past 3-4 years, we've all been hearing about digital transformation, but I've still yet to find anyone that can really tell me what does it actually mean at a meaningful level. So I'm going to cover a little bit of that today, but what I'm going to spend the majority of today doing is talking about how that intersects with artificial intelligence, initially from kind of the macro level of what's happening in the world and how things are changing, and then getting very explicit about how do you think about a cognitive transformation in your organization, and what are some of the various approaches you can take, and what are some of the building blocks behind that. So if we go to the first slide, and I will try the clicker here, but I've been told it's not working well. Nope, it's not. So bear with me as we go through that. I like to ground each talk I give in the topic of Davos and the World Economic Forum from the beginning of this year, because I think it set a really strong tone that artificial intelligence isn't another technology. It's a fundamental shift in how the world works and how we engage as companies, as countries, and as society at large. So the fact that we had heads of state, CEOs of companies get together at the beginning of 2016 and spend their entire time talking about what is it going to mean for society in a world where artificial intelligence and virtual reality and augmented reality become commonplace. Not as technologies, but actually as ways of engaging. And that's going to be very powerful. And if you go to the next slide, this highlights a little bit about one of the things that both excites and terrifies me when I look at this transformation. It's the rate of change. So if you look at each of the successive 3 industrial revolutions, they've happened in successively smaller and smaller time frames. And what we're looking at now is absolutely no exception to that. So whereas the information age has been the driving force behind most of the professional world that everybody in this room has experienced, we're going into a period of time that might be 20 years, might be 10 years. It's going to be a much shorter time period, though, based on what we're already seeing, where the way that we engage as a society and as companies with one another is going to shift. Now, when you've got the CEO of Google, the #1 company in the world from a mobile advertising point of view, having their CEO say we're moving from a mobile-first world to an AI-first world, that's a call to action. That's the largest company out there that makes money off of mobile saying that this industry is shifting and it's going to be AI-driven and not mobility and connectivity-driven as much anymore. You know, you had Klaus talking about the speed of current breakthroughs has no historical precedent as the chairman of the World Economic Forum. And there's been some other things out there. You had Mark Benioff at Davos this year make the comment that as a society we're entering uncharted territory. And I think most of you in this room are aware that he's made substantial investments in AI and looked at really putting Einstein as the backbone AI platform behind all of Salesforce in his company now. So really quick shifts in how companies are looking to leverage this. And even earlier this week, Amazon coming out and moving from using AI as point solutions within Alexa and others, and for their own use, to really commercializing that externally. So a big shift that you're starting to see across all of the major players in the industry. If you go to the next slide, I like this slide because it draws a real parallel between what happened in the information age and what we're seeing happen in the connected intelligence age now. So over the past 5 years or so, there's been a lot of investment in big data platforms. Now, there absolutely have been some great results from that. But if you ask most people behind closed doors, they'll tell you that we didn't quite get the return out of these platforms that we hoped for, that we spent on them. And that's actually reasonable to be expected when you look at how this parallels back to what we saw in the information age. We started with mainframe computers, platforms that were very big, enabled a lot of processing, but still were kind of unwieldy and people didn't know how to use. We didn't really start to see business value created until we moved to desktop computers, and then really that inflection point was when we started to see user-friendly interfaces moving us into the internet and kind of the entire connected world that we live in today. So that J-curve is something that drove that business value creation, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now at a much shorter time frame as it relates to artificial intelligence. Over the past 18 months, we've seen an incredible influx of machine learning as we've started to look at different platforms and different tools to help us extract insight and extract information from all of these big data platforms that we've built And we're just starting to enter into kind of what I'm calling ubiquitous user interfaces. But the Google Homes and Amazon Alexas of the world, the chatbots that we're seeing, ways that make AI something that touches all of our lives and all of the things that we do on a recurring basis. And that's accelerating very rapidly, as I think everybody in this room is aware. You know, where we go from there, I think machine intelligence, as we look at things being able to actually provide advice and coaching to us. And beyond that, I don't know, but I do know that we will see things and be able to do things that are fundamentally different, just as in, 1980, nobody could have predicted that we would all have a supercomputer in our pocket that was connected to all the information out there in the world. So, you go ahead to the next slide. This just puts some numbers behind that. So I think this is helpful when people try to understand how much of this is hype, what's real, what's not. There's a lot of people putting estimates out there, and I will be the first to say that almost all of them are probably wrong by some degree. But indicatively, they're right. They're all saying similar things, which is, one, the rate of growth of AI is moving at an incredibly fast rate. Depending on who you talk to, it's somewhere between 40 and 60%, which when you compare that to other traditionally fast-growing industries like biotech or computers, those are in the 10, 15% range at most. So we're really seeing a huge spike in growth. And a lot of both jobs created and jobs lost from that. And I think there'll be a lot of transition as new needs are created that are not fulfilled today, as well as some jobs are not available and made redundant, but that's something we're going to have to work through as a society. And that is going to be driven by that 25% number. That's the big takeaway from me. This is a number that Forrester came out with, and Forrester, as many of you know, is not a particularly outspoken or aggressive firm when it comes to making predictions. And they threw out that 25% of the job tasks in the world are going to be impacted by AI by 2019. That's less than 3 years away. And 25% of the job tasks in the world is an incredibly massive amount. When you think about what that means for each one of us in our day-to-day lives, as most people in this room, I'm guessing, work in kind of knowledge-based industries, that's probably closer to 75 or 80% of the job tasks in our companies that are going to be impacted. So that's going to have a huge impact on how each of our companies work, how we work as individuals within those organizations, and how we relate. So, what's that going to mean? If you go to the next slide, there's definitely going to be some winners out there. These are some numbers that came from Yuri Milner earlier this year. He threw out over the past decade, roughly $2 trillion of value has been created from technology-related platforms, and 40% of that has come from new companies. More importantly, he prognosticated that this rate of value creation is going to continue for the next 2 to 3 decades and potentially even accelerate. So for everyone in this room, from both the startup side as well as from the established company side, there's huge opportunity to really capitalize on this increase in value creation and take your company forward and be a part of that. However, if you go to the next slide, there's also a ton of risk. Every 2 weeks, a company is being knocked out of the S&P 500. The first time I heard that stat, I actually had to take a pause and go back and say, no, that can't possibly be right. I think about the S&P as a fairly stable group of companies, very established, best in the world at what they do. The fact that every 2 weeks one of them is falling out right now is a rate of change that's fundamentally different than anything we've ever seen. The average lifespan of an S&P 500 company now is 15 years. Not too long ago, it was 75 years. So we're seeing incredible change in who the leaders are, and we're seeing that at a rate that we haven't seen before. Fast forward 10 years from now, even at this rate of change, 75% of the companies that lead their respective industries will be different than they are today. And one brief tangent on that, Publicis Sapient is going to be releasing a study with Fortune in a couple weeks, and one of the tidbits out of that is that the people that are actually the most advanced from a digital transformation point of view, that have done the best to integrate the silos across their organization, believe by a 3 out of 4 ratio that their industry is going to be led by a disruptor within the next 5 years. So the companies that are actually the most profitable today, that are doing the best at leveraging digital, leveraging AI, are the ones that actually believe that their industry is going to be disrupted. So there is a huge amount going on, and I think that's something we all need to be aware of. That leads into a video that I like to show that I think encapsulates the inflection point that we're all at. So if you go to the next slide. Go back one, hopefully the video plays. So, the first lesson from that, obviously, is don't bring a sword to a gunfight. But in the terms of what we're talking about today, if you click forward once more, don't bring a 20th century business model to an AI-first world. And I think that's really the key point. A lot of companies right now are starting to look at AI and saying, how can I do what I do today better or faster? And that's not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, what can I do today that is fundamentally better or different than what I could do yesterday? That's the real power of what AI is starting to bring to the table. That's why at the World Economic Forum, they dedicated the entire conference this year to talking about it, is because it's changing the way we work. It's changing the way society is going to operate. So, going to the next slide, this is not an easy thing for a company to do. However, there's a few different ways you can start to approach it. So, this is something that we've been doing for a while around how to approach service design. And I think this is very relevant when you start to think about what can you do to change the way things work today with artificial intelligence. Most people think about tackling a problem within a specific part of the organization, a silo or a P&L line, or within a specific area of interaction, user experience, or back office or supply chain. The real opportunity lies in looking at, from a service design approach, taking who your customers are, whether they're retail customers, whether they're other companies, and looking across an entire value chain of what are you doing from them front to back, and then what are the things along each step of the way, from user experience to all the touch points you have with your customers and employees, to all of the operational aspects of your business, and what's creating great experience and what's preventing that. You can have the best designed website or mobile app or digital footprint in the world, but if there's problems in fulfillment or if there's problems in accounting that make that a bad experience for your customers, it's still a bad experience. So the real power is looking at what can you do with this technology now to create a great experience going forward from front to back. Now there's a ton that you can do with cognitive and AI in general. The next slide talks about what I think are the three building blocks of cognitive transformation. The first is insight generation, the second is customer engagement, and the third is business acceleration. So let me go through each of these. So if we click forward one more slide, around insight generation, I'll break this into a couple categories. The first is what we can do from structured data. We have a lot of structured data in our organizations today, in some cases a tremendous amount. And when you start to layer machine learning on top of this, there's a huge opportunity. I'll just speak to it from an advertising point of view, as Publicis does a tremendous amount in that space. When we look at the data that we have from a digital and television and mobile and point of purchase and device point of view, we know right now, and we have access to data that tells us for, give or take about 90% of this country, from the moment somebody wakes up to the moment they go to bed, what they do, where they're physically located, what they're looking at online, really terrifying amounts of data actually. But what we can do with that data by using machine learning are things that we could never do at scale with a team of data analysts. I don't care how many data analysts you have on your staff. Is be able to extrapolate what are the insights from that? What's actually driving behavior? And how do we reach people at those precise moments where it's going to drive real transactions or real calls to action for them that are going to impact the bottom line of our business? And that's something that we could never do before because we simply couldn't scale to that level of knowledge processing, but we can now with machine learning. The other thing that we can do with machine learning, as we start to look at applying this to common situations that we have, is generate new insights. So if you go to the next slide, I think this example really highlights something that was powerful and impactful for me. When AlphaGo beat Lee at Go earlier this year, this was something that highlighted a big change in how we look at generating insight. Because what happened here was, for those that don't know, there was a competition and Google DeepMind beat Lee et al. 4 out of 5 games, being the first time that a machine beat a best-in-class player at Go, which is something that you couldn't, from a brute processing point of view, manage to extrapolate out the same way you could with chess. So you had to actually think and strategize. And I'm not going to go into the depth of how they did that. Demis gives a great speech on that. But what they did in game 2 is they played, or DeepMind I should say, played a move on move 38 that all of the players in the world looked at that point in time and said, wow, DeepMind just made a huge mistake. There's no way this is the right play. And it actually was, subsequently referred to as a divine move, or lots of different terms referred to it, but it's that move that is so unique and was so transformative that it's one of the greatest moves in the history of the game, as people look back at it and realize that it fundamentally changed the course of that. There was an actual 1 in 10,000 chance that DeepMind had calculated that a human would make that play. So it wasn't something that Lee had even thought of in his head. Now the really powerful thing about that was, A, it was a winning move, but B, it inspired Lee. So back in game 4, Lee played another similar move in move 78 of that game that was also viewed as a 1 in 10,000 type of move that he never would have played without having played Go before with DeepMind and learned from that. So not only did DeepMind teach us something new about how to play the game, it taught Lee a new way to think about that. And that's something that I think from an AI point of view is going to be incredibly powerful for us, is being able to look at new patterns that we can unearth and figure out how does that apply to our business. What are things that we should be doing that we haven't thought about simply because we've been constrained by the way we think about the world. If you go to the next slide, this talks about the next tier of insight generation, which is really translating unstructured data into actionable insights. And this is everything around natural language processing and natural language understanding. So if you go to the next slide, this leads directly into one thing that I think most people in this room are somewhat familiar with right now, which is looking at how we engage with customers and how we engage in a voice-to-voice fashion with technology. This is something that we've been dreaming about for a very long time, the better part of all of our lifetime, really. And it's becoming real. So the next slide starts to lay out what does that evolution look like. Over the past decade or so, we've had tools, we've had appliances and wizards. We're really starting to see chatbots come to the forefront now. And chatbots are very good at taking natural language and extracting intent from that. Play music for me, turn the lights on, tell me the weather. Things that are very specific and task-driven. Where we're moving to right now, and where the technology actually enables us to go right now, is into the realm of assistants. And I think the difference between a chatbot and an assistant understands what you're saying from a contextual point of view within a narrow scope. So not across the entire universe, but if I'm talking about retail shopping for a brand, it understands that I'm talking about buying something within that brand. And being able to come back and say, let me ask you clarifying questions, let me understand better, and let me take what you're saying from an unstructured point of view and translate that into recommendations that I might make. We're going to see that move very quickly into the expert category as the machines start to have depth in specific domains. And there's even good examples of that today. I think X.AI is a great example as it relates to personal assistance. Looking at a very narrow domain that you don't think about having expertise in, but really there is a ton of expertise in managing somebody's schedule. And they've narrowed the scope down to that and do a very good job using AI to enable that. And I think we're going to see that across other areas, finance, healthcare, retail, as machines start to become that expert advisor to us. The savant of a machine being smarter than us, will it happen someday? Probably. Will it be next year? Almost definitely not. So I'm not as concerned about that. I think it's something that is fun for conversations at cocktail parties, but probably isn't as relevant when you think about your business strategy tomorrow. Go ahead. Next slide. Last point is around the last tier of optimization and leveraging cognitive to transform your industry, and that's around business acceleration. Looking at how you can use AI tools to automate different parts of your work process or accelerate them. And I have that 100-to-1 rule up there as a good example, or a good rule of thumb, I should say, which is for every day it takes you to teach a person something, you're probably going to spend about 100 days teaching a technology platform to do that if it's an automatable task with AI today. Now that's a gross generalization, and some things will be faster, some things will be longer, but that's a good way to think about it, is that it's going to take about 100-to-1 ratio for what it would take to teach a person, but then you have something that can do that, can be deployed across that. So that helps you when you think about the business case behind different areas. Now, that pyramid is the different areas. Cost reduction, I think, is the easy one that jumps to mind, but is the least powerful out of that. The areas of real opportunity are the next three. What can you do to gain a competitive advantage? If you can do something fundamentally faster than your competitors, you can actually deliver better value to them. If I can give you a commercial loan in 2 weeks as opposed to 2 months, that's a huge advantage for me going to market. If I can actually provide better insights about what's happening in my business and steer my product development because of that, that's also a huge advantage. And the pinnacle is really looking at what are those new businesses that I can create? What are the new opportunities that are out there that I could not engage in before? And kind of I'll lead with the quote of, what are the artificial boundaries that we've put in place in our businesses that are preventing us from doing things that shouldn't anymore because of AI? So, last slide. Really just leave you on the note of AI is really about expanding what's possible for humans. It's not about replacing us. It's not about changing us. Every industrial revolution we've been through, people have said that this is going to take over all of our jobs. Every single time, there's actually been more work at the end rather than less work for us. But there's also been a higher quality of life. And I think that's what we're seeing here is how do we make our lives better? How do we expand what we're capable of doing? And how do we really transform all of our businesses in the world at large? Thank you very much.